When you worked with the, actually I have a question. When you worked with the classified technology, was there any point when you thought that that it was based on non-human technology? I mean, obviously, when you've seen the TR-3B and sort of tried to piece together where that came from,
were, in my group of buddies and the handful of people I actually traveled and interviewed, there are always hints and rumors of reverse engineering. Now, what's strikingly funny, you'd think if people believed in reverse engineering, and they did, absolutely, you would think you'd also hear stories of aliens who flew them.
Right.
And none of them, other than acknowledging they had to be aliens, actually saw one or knew of one, which is not really unusual if you think about the compartmentalization, the extremes of compartmentalization the military goes to keep people from knowing too much of the big picture.
Right.
So
I wonder how that would affect the autopsy report and what your reaction would have been.
Let me go into this other thing a little.
Okay, go ahead. I'll back that up.
More. Between a couple of them, they knew the story all the way back to the early 50s, where I believe it was either Gravity Ran or General Gravity at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, which I believe is where General Rainey was stationed.
Okay.
Of the Roswell incident. So there was one of the oldest guys in the group was pushing 70 by that time. That was back in the mid-90s. Told me the story that when he was a young MIT graduate and he was at Carswell, that they had pieces of equipment that they were reverse engineering. And he was told it's foreign technology. And, of course, all foreign technology was handled by the FTD, Foreign Technology Division, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So after a year or so working on this stuff, trying to explain it, this micro-miniaturization of optic cables and circuits that were incredibly small, that they even had a hard time testing them. So at one point, he asked this leader of the group who had kind of befriended him and mentored him, he says, there's nobody on Earth that can make this stuff. And then the old scientist, he said, exactly. And he said, well, basically, what are you trying to tell me? He said, I'm not trying to tell you anything. You've already figured it out. So he was cryptic, but he acknowledged it wasn't made on Earth. I mean, there was more to the story, but I just don't remember it. But I did manage to track all the way back to the early 50s, where one of the guys had actually worked at, I believe it was Gravity Ran at Carswell Air Force Base.
Okay.
And they were doing reverse engineering. Now, what was the question after that?
The question was about the alien autopsy and your impressions of that.
I got the MJ-12 charter signed by Reagan by proxy, and the alien autopsy from a friend we'll call Dale. And I knew Dale all the way back from late 60s, the Vietnam conflict, and we were also stationed together at Cannon Air Force Base. We didn't work in the same area, but we were close friends. And his father was career NSA over 30 years. So when I was writing the book, I was talking to Dale in detail about the book, and he told his father about the story I was writing. And his father says, well, how well you know this guy? And he said, well, he's basically my best friend. I trust him with my life. So his father says, well, I'm going to give you a couple of documents. It's going to be a lot of stuff blackened out. And you retype them and mail them to him. So that's how I got, I was actually shocked. I had never heard of the MJ or MJ-12 group.
Right. And these are documents that are in your book, Alien Rapture.
Yes, and they're also on our alienscientist.com forum. You can actually look at even my own personal military documents. But yeah, I was I was shocked. And what's funny is I was the first one to talk about the removable lenses on the aliens from the autopsy report and the geo organ, which is, we have many organs, but apparently these Roswell aliens had this kind of look like a inner tube shape, small inner tube, or round, and that's why they call it geo organ. And it functioned as lung, heart, kidneys, whatever. So its physiology was completely, internal physiology was completely different than ours.
Yeah, there's rumors that those removable lenses went into the night vision technology division.
They were obviously external equipment. I mean, things we use as built into glasses or goggles or helmets. They actually somehow incorporated into some kind of thin film, probably nano technology, to where it was like a contact lens, and it just covered the whole eye to where when you people that see these aliens, they've got these dark eyes. So who knows? They could probably see in multiple spectrums, and the infrared, ultraviolet. They could block harmful rays. Who knows? It may even see through things.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I mean, technology we're just now discovering, or publicly, they were trying to figure out how it worked back in the 50s.
Right. There's other MJ12 documents out there. Of course, you're fully aware of Stanton Friedman and his work that he's done. Did yours, did the documents that you received match up in any way to what he had?
Yes, other than the fact that we plugged in, a lot of the names were blackened out. And Brad Steiger had actually, my co-author, had actually been with Jamie Shandera and Stanton Friedman and one other guy who revealed the original MJ12 documents. I think they were sent to, was it Cooper or? But anyway, Brad knew all about the MJ12 documents. And the names that were missing, he said, well, that had to be this guy and that had to be that guy. And we made a decision to plug in names, because otherwise, when people are reading the story, if there's just a bunch of blanks where there should be names, it wouldn't make any sense to them. And I've always admitted that we plugged in the names and one or two dates. In fact, when I originally came out, I posted the original blanked out, the way I received it, on Jeff Rentz's show. You can still go to Rentz.com and look up Fouché and find them. Of course, they're also on our forum. A couple of things that struck me is the signed by President Reagan by proxy basically means somebody rubber stamped that MJ12 charter behind Reagan's back. Somebody in secret government or whatever you want to call them. But when I read the MJ12 charter, having spent all those years in the government working on contracts and specifications and organizational charts and all that kind of stuff, the language read totally true to how something like that would have been written. I found no fault in it at all.
Mm-hmm. So there was it did line up with some of the other documents that were out there claiming to be the MJ12 documents.
Absolutely, but the problem is Stanton was skeptical, but he says that he said on the surface, because I don't have the original documents, it reads like what would have been written about those two subjects. But I met Dr. Woods' son out at Laughlin and offered to send him what I had, and he was extremely rude to me. And he says, if we don't discover it, we don't want to see it. And I'm going like, what a narrow-minded prick.
Okay.
And he was. I mean, he rode on his daddy's coattail like other people we know. And, he's not a doctor. He didn't spend 20, 30 years at McDonnell Douglas and stuff like that in high-ranking positions like his father. He just,
Right, okay. So, actually, I'm going to get Charles to ask, do you have a question about the FAR residents, Charles? Do you want to ask a series of questions, actually? Do you want to ask those?
Well, he's probably going to ask about the entrainment, light and sound technology that Dr. Farr used on Joe Green to retrieve his memories. Now, the CIA has experimented with strobe lights at different brainwave frequencies since the 30s, 40s, and then the CIA, one of the things a lot of people don't know is when they have these remote viewers, a lot of time to get them in the right mental brain state, they would use these goggles with the flashing LEDs to change their brain waves quicker. For example, if you have a light and sound machine, I have a Procyon from MindPlace, what I'm using now, you can actually go into deep theta like a Buddhist monk in 20 minutes, whereas these Buddhist monks spend decades learning how to do it on their own.
Right.
And you can change your brainwave state to learn, to be energized, to focus, to retrieve memories. I mean, there's endless amount of things you do it. And so CIA had a huge hand in it, and the guy, Robert Monroe, who started Monroe Institute with all this binaural brainwave audio, learned all his techniques from the CIA. Just like when I came out with my software NeuroSync, which is a behavioral modification software, it also used brainwave audio and video to entrain a person. Now, entrainment is simply the ability of the brain to synchronize with external stimulus, such as certain frequencies of pulsed light or pulsed audio.
Okay. Charles?
Any of the memories that that you recovered with the help of this technology, are there any that you regret uncovering?
Well, at one point, all of them. But the thing is I started using entrainment. My first circuit board, I think, fit in either a 386 or 486 tower computer, and it cost over $1,000. And it had a pair of ski goggles with the LEDs in the lens. And the lens was opaque. And I would even, once I got a portable one a couple of years later, which is also very expensive, I used to wear them to bed. And I'd put them right above delta, which is sleep, and deep theta, and leave them on for hours. And up to that point, I used to have horrible nightmares for years. Many, many years, all through my 20s, 30s, even as a teenager. So I started dreaming dreams that I could actually remember, and fragments started coming out to where when I woke up, not only did I remember my dream, but I actually remembered when these things happened and how they happened. Now, not everything I wanted to learn came out, but sometimes your mind blocks things that might be harmful to you.
Right, go ahead, Charles.
So the technology that the character Farr showed you, that was pretty advanced for its time. Would that be correct?
Oh, absolutely. He had all kinds of different strobe devices he had built, and had monitors that could monitor your blood pressure and your pulse while you were under. And it's not hypnosis. It's actually just reinforcing certain brainwave frequencies. And but yeah, he was the gadget guy. He was a physicist out there at Southwest Research, where he died. It's just amazing to me. Him and Robert Austin, who owns MindPlace, who I've bought all my stuff from over the last 20 years, were way ahead of their time.
What's the most incredible memory that you recovered using this technology?
I don't know if it's incredible, but the most traumatic was all the physical and mental abuse I went through as a child, which I'd blocked it all, and that's not something I really wanted to remember. I mean, my biological father was an absolute monster. I mean, he was a very brilliant, successful industrialist, but he was pretty much a raving lunatic drunk from the time he got off work until the time he fell in bed. And, I mean, when I say beatings, I'm talking about things like remembering my father slamming my mother's head down the toilet and fracturing her skull, putting her in a coma. So I'm not talking about slapping or kicking. I'm talking about violent abuse.
Right.
And I was 2 years younger than my brother, but my brother was a lot more traumatized than I was, and he'd pretty much broken his spirit. So when my father, even when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, start beating on my mother or my brother, I would literally throw myself in between them. And no matter what happened, I would take the blame. I got to the point where the beatings were far less severe than the mental abuse. So anyway, yeah, there were memories I really didn't need to clutter up my mind.
Right. But on the positive end of things, were there positive memories that come out that were like blocked? I remember you told me a story about when you were a child about sleepwalking.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't remember that. And also brings up the story about when we used to have a little nightlight kind of lamp. I mean, like a little 5-watt bulb or something in our bedroom because we were terrified of the dark. But one night I woke up and there was this big bear standing about 10 feet from my bed. And I was so scared. You might be able to imagine this. I'm sure you've seen it in movies. You're so scared that nothing will come out of your mouth.
Right. You think you're screaming, but nothing's coming out.
No, I was trying to scream. I remember that. With all my might. And I mean, it would just go like, I mean, it's nothing. So finally, after some point, I actually started screaming. And at my mother that there was a bear in the room. And she basically said, I'm going to beat your ass if you don't shut up and go to sleep. So I wouldn't stop screaming. And my brother was hiding under his pillow in the covers, in a twin bed next to me. And finally, she says, all right, I'm coming in there. If there's not a bear in there, you're getting a whipping. So I heard her coming down the hall, and that bear changed into a little person for about not even a full second, and then just disappeared in thin air.
So when you say little person, do you mean a short human?
It didn't look human. It happened so fast that for a long time I thought it was like a child.
Okay.
But it was about, I don't know, 4 feet tall. Had a big head, no surprise.
Okay.
And very skinny arms and legs. And as a child, not even ever seen TV or a movie back then. There were no TVs. That was my interpretation, that it was a child. So when I first started remembering this, I realized it wasn't a child. It was some kind of being.
Right. So this was part of the childhood memories that you were uncovering and that were floating back up to the surface of the past.
Yes.
Okay. Going back to the FAR residence and the high technology he had available, he had a concept about ancient civilization interacting with the gods, and did he really believe that this was true? Like, did the person Par believe what Far's concepts were in the book about alien civilizations interacting with humans?
Yes,
and the whole bit.
Yes, the real Dr. Farr with an F believed all that and told me all this stuff, pulled out all these books, and I don't think there was hardly any subject the guy wasn't well read on. I mean, he was definitely a Renaissance man. I had never read any of those Chariots of the Gods or Sitchin books or any of those other type books on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
But he was absolutely convinced that modern humans did not come from apes, and that there was a long period of tens, maybe 100,000 years to where apes or other beings or species, the DNA was meddled with. And he explained our junk DNA as parts of the experiments that didn't work, and the junk DNA was no longer used.
Okay, so he as a real person actually talked to you about the things that the character in the book were saying. And what was your reaction at the time? He's telling you all of this stuff, showing you books and saying, "Look here." And I mean, were you having difficulty, sort of?
Oh, it's funny, as I was raised as a Christian, and even in high school, I went to the Nazarene church there in Longview, and even got married in that church. And after a couple of years in the service, I just kind of got away from the church because I started having all kinds of questions. So the ironic thing was all these doubts and questions I had about my own faith and religion and the Bible. When he talked, I mean, it answered all of my questions. In other words, it gave me an alternative viewpoint that was logical.
All right, so you weren't sort of thinking in the back of your head, "Woohoo, this guy's nuts, gotta go,
No.
Where's the back door, how do I get out of here?"
No, not at all. I mean, he was a very calm, deliberate, brilliant person. It's like being able to sit down next to Einstein, have just a friendly conversation, and understand what he's saying.
Okay, I get that. No, I mean, you understand why I would ask that, though. I mean, a lot of people would be, might feel uncomfortable around a conversation like that, especially this was in the 90s, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, it was it was in the mid to late 80s. It was before I retired in 87.
Okay, so you were still in the service.
Yes, and I lived in San Antonio, not far from the Southwest Research, and I knew his son, and that's how I met him, and we just hit it off. I mean, his son was basically non-technology-wise and had no interest in that, and I think they had a very strained relationship, but even though he was a lot older than me, I just was very attracted to his knowledge, and because I love technology and science, and when you've got somebody like that that's patient with you, that explains things on your level, and allows you to ask dumb questions, it's like having a mentor in a way.
Yeah, I get that. And you met quite a few people during that time period. And again, this goes to the inspiration for writing the book Alien Rapture in the first place, is these feelings of you could call it anger that the American government was hiding this sort of technology, and that spurred the whole thing.
In 1987, when I retired after 20 years, I was basically medically disabled. I had heart surgery. Every disc and vertebrae in my back was messed up. My diabetes was out of control. I could go on and on. And when I started writing the book by the early 90s, say 93 or so, or 4 or 5, the doctors basically said, "Man, you're only going to live another year or two." He says, "You've outlived your Dacron graft that they put in your heart. It was only supposed to work for 10 years. You've had it for 30. I had this huge, and still do, aneurysm in my abdominal aorta down near belly button. So I had all these things." And he said, "You're a ticking time bomb. So it's a miracle you lived this long." So I kind of had a fatalistic attitude that even if the government came after me, I wasn't going to live that long anyway. So it was like, hey, I'll get the last laugh. So that's why I stuck my neck out as far as I did. originally we were just going to come out with a fiction book and hope people could read between the lines and realize it was true, except obviously the aliens. And the ending of the book. But then all of a sudden, I got away with that, and Brad Steiger and Bob Silverstein put together a series of TV interviews, radio interviews, one right after another, several times a day for that week. That was at Laughlin. The BBC flew over a team of 6 people and interviewed me for like 6 hours. Of course, they only ended up using like 7 minutes of it in Real of the Skies. And then the German TV, which I never saw because it was POW, did an hour-long special on the Triangle after a long interview with me. And then I did radio shows like Jeff Rentz and Bill Boshears and a whole bunch of other people, and several smaller TV stations sent a crew. And then also gave a presentation to MUFON in Los Angeles. So we hit so many places in a week and we've come out with a small publisher that published us because the big publishers wouldn't touch the book.
Right, which is unusual considering it's, Brad Steiger. And anybody in this field who knows about Brad Steiger knows the guy's written like a ridiculous amount of book. And it's
160, 170 books published, and none of them are self-published.
Right.
And he's had big publishers. And Bob Silverstein was considered the golden boy of the book publishing world. I mean, he did the book deals and movie deals for books like Chariots of Fire. He had never been turned down.
Right.
And they thought, like, this is fishy. We think you guys are revealing classified information. And they wouldn't touch it. Okay.
Yeah, because the whole scene at the end of the book, I'm not going to give it away, obviously, but that was just something that was added. It wasn't a real event, but it was just perspective.
It was, after talking to Dr. Farr and other people, I took literary license and made a jump to conclusion that this is possibly one tangent that the human race could take to advance us to the next evolutionary step. And like I said, the aliens and the ending is just totally hypothetical.
Right, of course. But now, weren't you supposed to be on Art Bell's show back then?
I was scheduled for Art Bell. Brad Steiger did a weekly show, usually with Art Bell and also Jeff Rentz. And he talked to Art Bell about me twice, sent him a copy of the book. Art Bell said the book was extremely fascinating to him, and he had so many questions for me. And they scheduled me and then canceled. And they scheduled me again a week or two later and canceled me again. And Brad just kept apologizing. He said, I don't know what the hell's going on. He said, it's almost like he'll have all these crazy people on there, but he won't have somebody on there that actually has credentials.
Yeah, and going into that, we're going to come back to this, but just quickly, you put all of your military records out. When you did the BBC, didn't you show them a whole bunch of your military records?
Yes, I had about 900 documents that I saved from the military, and I threw away more than that because they were just irrelevant to anything I might ever need, like through the VA or whatever. And I showed the BBC, MUFON, the International UFO Congress, their whole staff, including Ken Sedden and Bob and Terry Brown, about 200 documents. They showed my security classifications, my training, my medals. I had 3 meritorious service medals, which is good for even a general. And I had 2 commendation medals. I had a Vietnam Medal for Valor, which is heroism. I had Presidential Unit Citation, Outstanding Unit Citation, many medals and awards that I was very proud of. And I know people that go through their whole career and get 1 commendation medal and only dream about meritorious service medals.
Right.
So I showed him all that. And what happened is the BBC behind my back, I told him, I said, you can't take any pictures of my documents to have my Social Security number in. So while they're filming me, there's one of their assholes had a camera and was taking pictures of documents that had my Social Security number on. So when they come out with Real of the Skies, my old Social Security number is right there. They show a document with my old Social Security number on. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, my God.
So, that's why I don't trust the media much.
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to get that information out there that you had provided your military records to
Yes,
prove.
And I've posted a few select ones, like my performance report that General Doran signed, and my civilian performance report at CEA when I was a senior program manager working under Colonel Barry McKeon. He had retired, but he was a decorated SR-71 pilot and a close friend of mine.
Right. So just now that we've set that ground, we're going to go back to the Art Longview. Did Brad Steiger eventually contact Art and say what's going on?
He just said that after thinking about it, he wasn't interested, which totally baffled Brad. And Brad says, "Hey, this guy has a document that shows he was assigned to Detachment 3 in the summer of '79, which you well know is Groom Air Base." And Art says, "Yeah, but we can't prove any of that's real." And Brad says, "Well, hell, I vouch for him." So anyway, that's it. I really believed after that, and listening to Art Bell for a couple of years, that he didn't want people on there with real credentials for the most part. He had fringe people on there. The wilder their stories, the better.
Right, and it's just unusual that happened. You sort of got blocked from going there. But you had a busy time during that period doing lectures. Your MUFON presentation is up on YouTube, available, thanks to Alien Scientist. A lot of your information's out there. I think your book was even put out for free, wasn't it?
Last I checked, it was on Scribed.
Okay.
I'm currently rewriting it, adding some things that have come back to me since I wrote the book, which explains some of the technology and other things that I wanted to go into more detail. See, the original book, 30% of the book was cut out by the publisher.
Oh, okay.
For one reason or another. So all I'm doing is editing the pre-Blue Line draft that was the full-length story. And I'm going to put it up on Alien Scientist and sell it as an ebook for $2 or something like that, and so we can generate some funds for Alien Scientist research.
Okay, good. Charles, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, how close have you been to alien technology that's either in its original state or back engineered?
I don't think I've ever seen any technology that was in its original state. In other words, I never saw Star Wars weapons or stuff like that. I saw what the military had that was extremely advanced, far more advanced.
More advanced than what we should have our hands on.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, with that computer, I mean, it was 20 years ahead of its time. Now, most people find that hard to believe. They'll say, well, look at the circuitry. You can see how it was developed, how it got better. Well, yeah, how did it get better? How did it originate? I mean, our technology advances since the 60s. It's just incredible. It's almost unbelievable. Our technology's growing so fast, especially like in the material science with nanotubes and quasi-crystals and other exotic materials. It just, people can't keep up, even in their own fields. There's breakthroughs every day.
Right. Absolutely.
And it's totally unexplainable. I mean, how do you go 50,000 years from the invention of the wheel, and you still got a wheel that's being greased with ox fat and made out of wood.
Yeah, I get it. It's pretty unusual. What about? I mean, do you still have contacts in the Black Ops programs that tell you stuff, or is that just faded away?
Well, hell, over half the people I knew are dead, and I should have died long before them because they were in good health when we started researching the book. And now here I am in the same miserable health I've been all these 30-plus years, and I'm still here talking, which just baffles me. So if I had contacts on the inside, I wouldn't talk about it, but I'm not without my own resources.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I was asking there is, are they still giving you information about programs that have been going on? And, of course, that would, at this point, have to fall into the hearsay category. But what is that information that they're telling you? I mean, where would be the state of the technology today?
The only thing I'd bet my life on that I have been told a few things about is that we have a space fleet off the Earth. And, for example, the Flying Triangle was a platform. It was massive. You can imagine the amount of personnel and equipment they could take to the moon or Mars or somewhere, and it's big enough it could be its own space base or space platform.
What do you mean by massive? How big would that be?
Well, the operational model was 600 feet.
Okay, that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you could take enough equipment with you to set up moon bases or build different facilities, make our space station look like, a little tiny trailer behind your car.
Yeah, it's like a tin can, really. So when Richard Dolan talks about a breakaway civilization, that there are technologies being utilized that are so far beyond what NASA's doing and what they're doing in the aircraft industry, that it is almost like a civilization that's broken away from the mainstream science and technology.
No, I absolutely believe that. I absolutely believe that has been happening since at least the early 80s, if not sometime in the 60s. It baffles me that so many people don't believe in any of this stuff. There's so much evidence out there.
Right. So they would be, in a way, they would be separate from us. I mean, they certainly can't. I've talked about this before. Who are they going to talk to? I mean, they can't talk to mainstream people. They can't talk to mainstream scientists. They can really only communicate with each other. If they're aware of the advanced technology and the breakaway civilization, they can really only communicate to each other. They can't step outside of that circle.
Well, exactly. The whole time I was in the 12 years I was married to my first wife, she would think I was at a school somewhere and I was on a black program. Because before the fall of the Soviet Union, nobody talked about anything. In fact, it was illegal to even use the name NRO or NSA. We used to call it no such agency.
Okay. What's NRO stand for?
That's the National Reconnaissance Office, and that was classified. So, I mean, people didn't tell their wives. You did your work. It was like a parallel universe, and then you went home once you left work, and you left work at work, and that was all there was to it. Wives ask questions, I just worked on equipment all day.
Oh, okay.
Very boring. It wasn't. It was very exciting.
Of course it was. So like I said, the people in these sort of programs, these very advanced programs, if they're on these platforms or the space fleet that you're talking about, then they're separate from us. They're a separate civilization.
Well, it was like when they sent Columbus took the original ships to the Americas. I mean, they were half a world away. cut off completely.
Right.
And they took people and started establishing small towns, and some of them didn't make it, and some did. But, you know, it would take, a week, I think, or something to get from England or Spain to North America. And that was no different than back then. The people would hear, oh, we've discovered North America, and it's endless resources, a bountiful land. I mean, it would be like when we first saw people land on the moon.
Right.
It would have been shocking. Everybody would have been talking about it.
Right. So, but these guys keep pretty much to themselves.
Yeah, but they're explorers, and my God, I mean, somebody says, hey, you want to volunteer to go to the moon and work, or go to Mars and work? It's like, you know, you'd kill to have a job like that.
Yeah, and you'd be willingly keeping your mouth shut, and you know, to do something as exciting as that. What are you going to do? Jeopardize it by telling everybody at a dinner party that you work on Mars?
Well, not only that, a lot of I don't want to get into 9/11, but there are some people that disappeared because the real story is bullshit. If you had a high-profile person that needed to disappear and you didn't want to kill them, you say, hey, you know, we get this huge moon colony or Mars colony. How'd you like to go up there? And that way you can start all over again. Now, what you got to realize is that when Hal Puthoff ran the remote viewing project at Stanford Research Institute in California, his best remote viewer was a guy named Ingo Swann, who wrote a book called Penetration.
Yep.
Which you can find Penetration on Scribe. And in the last couple of chapters, he writes about all the huge facilities on the far side of the moon, which some people call the dark side of the moon.
True. Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible that this is an absolute reality, that this breakaway civilization exists, and there's stuff going on that we just don't know about. And perhaps some of those things we're seeing in the sky that we're identifying as alien technology and alien crafts are human-made back engineering.
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, back in the day, maybe in the 50s or something, maybe 2% were actual alien UFOs. If you look at all the reports and investigations back then, the military things that have been released, there were absolutely things that generals like Twining said they're not from Earth and they're visiting us.
Yeah.
But nowadays, since the 70s, 80s, and on, our own space vehicles just keep multiplying. I mean, think about it. Why, when we retired the SR-71, they said we don't need it anymore, we got satellites. Well, that's bullshit, because even the KH-11 keyhole and KH-12 keyhole satellites the NSA had used hydrogen thrusters, and there was a limitation on how much they could move around. So they came out with the SR-75, also called Penetrator,
yeah,
and replaced it, which has been spotted a number of times around the world. And then I talked about a vehicle called the Scramp, which was the SR-74 that rode on back of the SR-75 up to about 80, 90, 100,000 feet, and then it took off and went into orbit, which is exactly, what is it, the X-37 or 47 now?
Oh, the one that's riding on the back of the other plane that takes off and goes, yeah, okay, got it.
Goes on. So, I mean, anytime they publicly release new technology, NASA's that way. If NASA's saying, oh, we've invented something or we've discovered something or we're going to build this, it's because it's hand-me-down technology.
Right.
It's already been either put in production or rejected.
It's old news. It's old tech.
I mean, I call the space shuttle the old yellow school bus, because even when they put up the space shuttle, it was old technology.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Have you ever been in an underground base?
I've been in underground tunnels at Buckley Field outside of Denver in the early 70s, where they had massive several-story buildings underground, and they built those huge geodesic domes with radar to track movement in space.
Right.
whether it was space vehicles or space debris or whatever. And then also at Edwards Air Force Base at the JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory facilities that was run out of UCLA Goldstone in California.
Okay. Okay, now are you aware of any other underground bases? Not been in, but aware of.
When I was at a facility called DARK, originally I thought it was S4 because of Bob Lazar's lies, and I've corrected that mistake and admitted I've had a huge leak there that was wrong. It went, as far as I know, at least 10 stories underground, and it was massive. I mean, you could see main hallways that would just fade off in the distance.
And is that DARC as in D-A-R-C?
Yes, Defense Advanced Research Center. And that was somewhere south or southeast of Groom Air Base, but it wasn't at Papoose. In fact, there's been geologists and drone engineers and everything else use Papoose and said, you know, there's no facilities there. There's no damn parking lot or buildings on the side of the mountains or vehicles parked around or outside a secret entrance. You know, they'll all just flat tell you it's total bullshit. And the fact is S4 is at Tonopah. It's a radar site.
Okay.
And, of course, all these years, everybody listens to that Bob Lazar, and they go, look, he was at Papoose at S4. And I said, no, he wasn't. He heard about that because he had a relative working at Tonopah. And he mentioned a classified radar area that was S4. That back then, Lazar told all these lies, hundreds and hundreds of lies, because there basically wasn't the internet in 1988. It wasn't internet until the late 90s, to speak of. So he never thought he'd get caught because everybody would be comparing notes and looking shit up.
Right. So you think this underground base was somewhere else?
No, I think there's an underground base at in or around Groom Air Base, and I had people tell me that there was this tram system, some type of electric vehicle like a train, high speed, that ran from Edwards Air Force Base, North Base, to Area 51, Groom Air Base.
Oh, okay.
Because when I was down in the JPL tunnels, a lot of the side tunnels are only like 20 feet across, and they would take concrete and flatten out the bottom eighth or whatever to where you walked, and they had gas lines, electric lines, all kinds of cables and lines down there, and then there were doors that you need a key card, and a personal code that the circular area around the doors was like 30 feet wide. Now, you can get some pretty large vehicles in a 30-foot wide tunnel.
Absolutely. And especially if this thing's, like you said, several layers below the ground. It's a multiple layer facility.
Well, I had a friend, Dave Lewis, who I work with at Nellis. We're kind of drinking buddies and pool buddies and all that, but he used to talk all the time about his brother being up in Area 51, and he'd see these boring machines that were 30-foot round. They operated them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, excavating underground.
Okay.
The tunnels, and then they'd also run parallel tunnels and then get in there and flatten them out to where they could build buildings inside them.
Now, Phil Snyder came out and talked about that. He eventually was murdered, but I mean, he came out and gave a few lectures on that as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I've heard the name. I don't remember ever watching any of his stuff. My problem with ufology, actually it's for the most part ufology, is that everybody borrows everybody's story and says it's mine. Just like when I came out with my book, George Nori, something like Nagasaki or something, but he came out and adopted my whole story and said, he was at Groom and he saw the triangle and he was the first one who knew about the magnetic field disruptor. I mean, these guys, they just copy everybody else's stuff.
Right. Yeah, that does happen a lot in ufology.
And they completely keep changing their story. My basic story is in the book and my lecture, and I only gave my lecture to the UFOC in 98, 99, MUFON 99, once in Sacramento, I think late 99. I only gave it a handful of times. It wasn't like I was on, everybody wanted me on the circuit. Hey, you can sell your books and you can get paid. And I was never paid for any interview. Not a penny. I mean, I got free lunches and dinner sometimes, but that was it. So I never made a dime off any of those lectures or interviews. Unlike some people won't talk unless somebody pays them a stipend or something.
Right.
And I mean, I even had, I won't name the names, but I'm ashamed to say they would say, well, you got to come back, this or that, and give another presentation. I said, I don't have anything new. They said, well, just elaborate or exaggerate. Or I said, you're basically saying make up new stuff so you can have me back on your circuit. And I said, well, and that's what they were saying. And that's why you see so many of these guys. They just keep making up more and more stuff.
Right.
They start off, they saw a UFO. And the next thing, they test a UFO. And the next thing, they're in a hangar, accidentally, there's a UFO. And then the next thing, it's like, oh, that UFO was sitting at Area 51. But they have no credentials showing they had any military, most of them, or documentation. And I'm telling you one thing about the military, they're obsessive about documentation.
Right.
Every assignment, the length of assignment, who ordered the assignment or gave permission, every training, every bit of training you've ever had. When you permanently changed from one base to another, conferences you went to, your performance reports, your medals, your awards, they're obsessive about documentation. So for people to say, I have no documentation, is baloney. You can get a copy of your military records, I believe, out of St. Louis.
Yeah. You hear a lot about above top secret and levels above top secret. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I know from 20 years of having top secret Q clearance, which is as high as you can get, that when you have a top secret clearance that authorizes you to work on programs that are top secret, or Q clearance, anything related to nuclear weapons. Now, once you get that clearance, for example, say you're working on the F-117 when it was top secret at Edwards and Burbank and Groom Air Base, you had to get a special access program clearance, which is usually rubber stamp because you're qualified and they need somebody with your qualifications, so they gave you a special access program code, which is in your records most of the time. Or you have a secret compartmental investigation that goes along with it. Or special background investigation, SBI. I think I made a mistake there somewhere. I don't know where. But anyway, for example, I had a couple of SBIs, special background investigations that also had like lie detector tests or psychological tests a couple of times. So what you have is you have lateral jobs. The top secret gives you your clearance to work different jobs if you have the training and you're needed in a specific slot. Once you're selected, they'll give you a SCI, a special access program number, and that clears you to work on the equipment.
Right.
So basically, I had several SAPs and SCIs that were awarded me because I worked on different black programs.
Right.
Okay. Even the president has SAPs and SCIs, but a lot of times they're blanket. In other words, it'll be a code that says you're authorized to read information about everything.
Right.
So there is no, I've heard 20 levels above, 27 levels, 30 levels, 32 levels above, and this is made up by people that have no clue how actual clearances work. It's it's like Dean's that I had 32 levels or something above cosmic. Well, cosmic is no different in NATO. That's a NATO term than top secret.
Right.
So when he says, "Oh, I had a cosmic clearance," everybody goes, "Ooh!" All he's saying is, "I had a top secret clearance."
Yeah, and it's the NATO version of the word top secret.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there's that other myth that goes around and never ends.
The multiple levels of stuff, yeah. And that you can never track my history because all of the stuff that I did is so secret that there'll never be any records of it at all. So I can't actually prove what I'm telling you is true.
Some of the codes I had, equipment or aircraft prototypes and stuff, aren't available on my records. I assume because the plane was never put into production, it just, after that, there was no reference. There was no SAP for that program. So it was just deleted from my records, probably automatically. For example, when I was trying to get my VA disability to cover my health care, I had a Medal of Valor from Vietnam, and I kept telling him I was in Vietnam twice, gave him the months, years. It wasn't part of my records because it was NSA-related assignment. Back then, the NSA wouldn't release any information on anybody.
Okay.
And it wasn't until just a few years ago that they allowed their records of training and jobs to be released. Of course, they redacted anything classified about the job. But most of the time when people write up, for example, your reviews or your medals for promotions or any of that kind of stuff, they know not to write anything that's classified. But
Okay.
people's whole records disappearing is impossible. I mean, these people say, they deleted my diploma. Why? It's not related to anything classified. Like that Lyra, Bursch, and Lazar. Or they don't know their professors in their school. Bob Lazar claimed, I went this professor at MIT, and kind of find out it was from Pierce Junior College.
Okay.
I only took a couple of courses. Where's your pay stubs? Where's your income tax filing showing where you worked or who you work for? Lazar said he worked for the Department of Naval Intelligence. Well, that hadn't existed since World War II.
Right.
Everything on Bob Lazar's W-2 that he showed is wrong, and you can see where it's been washed and retyped. And he was a photo technician, so he knew how to do that stuff, even though it was done very crudely. But for a couple of decades, he got away with it.
Right. And Dan Bursch claimed he was had a military rank, right?
He was never in the military. We filed stolen valor charges, several people on him. Then he started taking down all his videos and everything on the internet talking about him being a captain, and he actually had pictures of him in a fatigue uniform holding a pistol, and the guy's disabled, drawing disability check, but yet he was over there shooting in Iraq. I mean, it's just total baloney. He's the biggest liar I've ever heard in my life. He was never in the military. He didn't get a doctorate degree. Like, so many people, you can't, all of a sudden they have no records. They don't even have personal records. Like I said, W-2s, income tax filings. By the way, you can get back copies of that stuff from the IRS. Where did you live? Who was your roommate?
Mm-hmm.
Who were your friends with? I mean, it's totally unbelievable that anybody could believe that not only all your government and military records disappeared, but all your personal information disappeared too.
Right. And then we still have this. I mean, Bob Lazar and Dan Bursch. I mean, they're the old versions of that. Some of the new versions are, William Brockbrader claiming he was a Navy SEAL and all of that stuff, and his records and all of that information.
Well, what's amazing is mostly you, and myself, and Dan Benkert, and Chief Shipley,
and Charles
have all totally debunked this guy. Yet he keeps going on, and he has a huge following. It's like he's some kind of virus that you can't kill.
Mm. And you actually worked at Area 51, and his claims are, no military records at all.
Well, I actually have posted it's called a partial review. For example, if you're gone more than 30 days to another job, they will give you a add-on kind of a performance review for that short period of time to explain your absence. Now, it doesn't say on there, I worked at Groom Air Base, but what it does say is I was assigned to FFTC Detachment 3, and that is Groom.
Okay, it just goes to show that there's people out there that come out with these claims that don't have any information to back them up, and yet you have, hundreds of military documents. You've got all kinds of information to back up your story about what you've done and where you've been, plus you've got insider information as well, and you're naming their names. You're giving their names out. Of course, they're fictional names in the book, but now you come out with their real names, that these were real people. Charles had a question and about the TR-3B, and I wanted to bring him in to ask that.
Yeah, late 2010, I had occasion to see a triangular craft fly overhead going north to south, and had I not been looking up, I would have never known it was there. It was absolutely massive. I estimated it to be about 150 to 200 feet, and I had no idea what it was. And, of course, now, having talked to you and, gone over some of your presentations and whatnot, I, fully believe that's a TR-3B. What kind of speeds are they capable of, in our atmosphere? And what kind of speeds are they capable of once they leave this atmosphere?
From what I was told, the operational model, which I never saw, could do Mach 9 in atmosphere. Now, a lot of people said, well, why do they have these multi-mode rocket engines on each corner of the triangle? And a lot of them think that's for propulsion. Well, in atmosphere, they're not used. What you have is you have two nuclear generators that power the magnetic field disruptor that warps gravity by 89%. So you're actually only propelling 11% of the old operational model. I've heard since then that we have achieved total anti-gravity as a propulsive force. I have no facts on that. But if you notice around the triangle, there's these vents, and they're vectored intake and thrusters. So these nuclear engines can create thrust out through the ports. Like if it's going one direction, all the ports coming out the back would be thrust, and the side intakes would be for intake air, much like a jet engine. I don't know the details of how it works. The thrusters, multi-mode rocket thrusters on the corners, are only used in an emergency in atmosphere, and that's why only rarely do you see when people spot triangles that the corners are lit very brightly. Now, once it gets into space, anti-gravity only works so much. The further you get away from a gravity source like Earth, the less it's going to work. So back then they used these multi-mode rocket engines just like they did on the space shuttle to give them thrust or to slow them down when they're, say, approaching a landing on the moon or Mars. And that's why it's called a platform instead of an aircraft, because it doesn't operate as a conventional aircraft.
And what sort of speed could they have? I mean, we heard about what sort of speed they could attain outside of the atmosphere?
I have no idea, but I would think since they have the multi-mode rocket engines for space thrusters, and I've heard of nuclear engines being used in space. I don't understand the actual propulsive concept, but what you've got to realize is that the prototype was being built at least in the early 80s, and I heard there were several smaller triangular vehicles long before that.
Okay.
So God only knows, I mean, since they've been flying the operational model since the early 80s, that's 30 years ago. I'm pretty sure they've got past multi-mode rockets and have achieved gravity. So it would be, even that would be obsolete. They'd probably use it just for base stations on the moon or Mars, something like that, and just park them and use them for like living quarters. And
yeah, who knows where they're at this point? I mean,
yeah.
At this point, we really don't have any idea. You had another question, Charles?
Just that these TR-3Bs could be used to move the type of equipment that they would need to build bases, whether they be on the dark side of the moon or under the surface of the moon or Mars. They would be capable of doing that, right?
Absolutely. And not only that, think about this. Energy source. When you're building anything, you need energy. Well, you've got two nuclear power units in the vehicle that you could tap into the energy. You could recharge electric vehicles, for example. You can provide light. You could provide lighting. I mean, I'm just saying, you have an endless source of energy there.
And you could absolutely transport that underground boring machine that you were talking about earlier. I would think that size of this vehicle would allow them to transport that to the moon or Mars or anywhere they wanted to dig these underground tunnels and the areas.
Absolutely, and think about it. Everything would be electric because you couldn't use combustion engines in a near vacuum.
That's true. Okay. Right, so it'd have to be a specialized form of technology to use in those areas, right? Of course.
Well, like right now, they just released this week a discovery on batteries that will quadruple the energy density of batteries, which will, take a car that can only run 50 miles on electric and it can run 200 miles. And it's cheaper and it's not using precious metals like a lot of these other exotic batteries are using.
Yeah, exactly.
So God only knows what the military
had
20, 30 years ago, much less now. I mean, it's like Ben Rich of the Skuntworks said. He says, we have a technology to take ET home, which means we can go to the stars. And that guy wasn't a liar. He was probably the most brilliant aircraft designer in world history. And he designed the SR-71.
Right.
And F-117 and classified aircraft that I saw that it's never been released.
Yeah, that's true. They're working on those programs. It's just interesting that the possibilities of having a vehicle that size and the sort of equipment you could move to other planetary systems like the moon and Mars and whatever the case may be. The possibilities are endless, really.
Yes, and the technology's been there. I mean, if we could put a man on the moon back in the 60s, and believe it or not, it wasn't the latest, greatest technology.
No, it wouldn't be. I mean,
the space shuttle, for example, the materials and even the avionics and star navigation, all that stuff was off-the-shelf equipment. There wasn't anything really high-tech on the original space shuttle. So, it's deception. Everything that NASA does is deception.
Right.
If they've got something they want to release that's not that classified and won't hurt national security, they'll give it to NASA. If they've got hand-me-downs of technology that's 20 years old and they found something better, then NASA discovers it.
They're like the used car. They have like a used car lot loaded with lemons, That's what they get to play with. Yeah, it's just the possibility is endless of what they could do and what where they could be at this point in time. I don't know. Do you have any other questions, Charles?
Just an off the cuff question about the TR-3B. It's capable of going out into space. It's capable of flying around our atmosphere. Is it possible this TR-3B could operate in water?
There's absolutely no reason it couldn't be, because what you got to realize is completely, basically hermetically sealed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can propel 89% of the weight or mass in space, then underwater you would have anti-gravity. because you also have a natural buoyancy, and you could flood different chambers like a submarine and use the magnetic field disruptor to give you propulsion. You wouldn't need rocket engines or propellers. And with this nuclear vectored thrusters, you could take water in the inlets and in front and exhaust it out the back. So this obviously,
Okay.
best place in the world to hide these things would be the bottoms of oceans.
Right, where you wouldn't get a lot of interaction. Very good point. Very good point. Okay, we've gone over our time. You know what? I still have like a couple dozen questions, but we've gone over our time a little bit. And what I'd like to do is, if you have, I know you have a spot on the Alien Scientist Forum. If you could just give out that information on where people would go there, and they could post on the site, and you'd answer them and talk to them.
Okay. First of all, you said you were going to post the link on your show.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
In text.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Charles and Scott. It's always fun when we pick each other's brains. But anyway, you can find me, Edgar Fouché, on the alienscientist.com. Alien Scientist is one word, .com forum. So when you go to alienscientist.com, look for the forum link. Or you can look at my YouTube channel. It's called eFearful, EFEARFULL. So come on over to the Alien Scientist Forum. Scott's a special guest too, and ask us questions and check us out. And that's it. It's been a pleasure.
Okay. And I'll also put a link to your lecture that you did on at MUFON. That'll also be in the upcoming guests, and the next day, of course, it'll be in the archive. Right. All of your information will be there. People want to go over to the forum, the Alien Scientist Forum, and ask you questions personally, sort of get a follow-up. You're more than happy to answer those questions.
Oh, I try to. I mean, it's rarely I don't answer somebody unless it's just really obscure, stupid things.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. Charles, I got to thank you for coming on and asking those questions. I know you put a lot of time and effort into reading the Alien Rapture book, and you got a lot of good questions out of it, so I thought I'd bring you on to ask those questions.
Well, I hope it wasn't that much effort to read the book.
No, I myself read it twice as well. Yeah, it was good. It's an easy read.
Yeah, I'm into my third reading of it now. And it's just a fascinating book because a lot of the stuff that you talk about in that book is stuff that we theorized 30 years ago.
Oh, that's funny, too. We never even touched on the fact that I talked about exotic materials like quasi-crystals and electrochromatic coating and all that stuff was laughed at back then. Now we just got a guy this last year won a Nobel Prize on quasi-crystals.
Right. Well, you were before your time.
Well, I didn't invent any of that. I just heard about it.
Yeah, I mean, coming out with the information, you were before your time. People weren't ready to accept it back in 96 or 98.
Well, there was no public reference material. People, even scientists. In fact, several years ago when I first started talking to Jeremy, the alien scientist, he was MIT taking physics courses. He's brilliant. He had a full ride, a full ticket at MIT, which is rare. But anyway, when I was talking about quasi-crystals and some of these carbon composites and electrochromatic coatings and stealth coatings, all that, he didn't have a clue about any of it.
Right.
And he had to go ask his professors until, he found somebody that knew a little bit about it, and then he started doing his own research. And he was just blown away that I was talking about this stuff to friends in the early 90s and also in my book in 98.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I appreciate your time. And I know you don't really do a lot of interviews. You probably haven't done one for years. So I appreciate that as well.
No, I did one with Jeff Rentz here a few months back because Brad Steiger practically begged me to come on with him. No, I've got to the point where I don't like Jeff Rentz. We used to be friends because he's so anti-Israel and he's so pro-Islam that he's gone off the deep end. I understand a lot of the things people don't like about Israel, But to condemn all Israelis as being the same would be like everybody comparing Americans to David Duke, the racist.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate your time. I'm glad you came out. I'm glad you talked to us. Getting your information out there is important. I think people should read your book and look into your story because it's fascinating.
I appreciate it. I will continue putting up videos. I'm earful. I'm going to take down some of the original ones that were horrible lighting and redo them. I'm in the process of doing one now, a two-parter. Charles, have you seen the videos I'm putting up?
I just started watching them the other day. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to talk about things from the book since you guys kind of brought it up, and Danny's been pestering me and other people for years. The backstory.
Right.
Of me being Joe Green, and personal things happened to me that I've never talked about publicly before.
Right. And some of them we've talked about here today as well.
Yes.
We'll definitely do a follow-up because it does sound like there's more information that we could cover. We'll do a follow-up at some point, and I appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, Ed.
You're quite welcome.
And we'll talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.